Good, excellent. Welcome everyone. We're talking about regulating behaviour and FASD today. As for all of our sessions, it'll go for about 20 minutes and then we'll have a Q&A. The first part will be recorded. The Q&A part won't be recorded or uploaded to the website. So I'll just again start by acknowledging the traditional owners of all the different lands that we're meeting on today and pay my respects to elders past and present and extend that respect to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander people here today. FASD and behaviour regulation is a big issue. It's probably something that every carer of a child with FASD or a young person with FASD is going to struggle with at some point, and I'll be really interested to hear some of your experiences in the chat. So why do children with FASD escalate? Sensory overload is a really common thing. There's just too much that they can, sensations that are difficult for them to process or make them uncomfortable. They can't understand what you're saying. There's something about the environment or the expectation in the moment that's just too hard for them to do. And they haven't got the ability to identify or communicate their needs earlier to prevent them escalating. It might be that they can't shift from one thing to another, or they can't manage change, or they don't have good impulse control, which is very characteristic. And it could be fueled by, being hungry, thirsty, tired, or just emotionally overloaded or having had a bad day. And they're really not able to identify early signs and seek help, as, other children might be able to do a bit better. And they can't tell you another way. When we see young people getting dysregulated, often the demands are increasing of them for, independence or whatever, but they can't meet the increase expectations. They want to be independent, so they struggle to have things, and they want the things that other young people do, but they haven't got the skills to manage them. So they're more often told no, and they often, things end in, end in a problem. They don't have a lot of successes, they don't understand things that their peers have learned, but they want to be part of things, but they haven't got that, whether it's the emotional regulation skills or just the planning skills, the ability to go, well, I better take my jumper because it's going to be cold, whatever it might be. They can also get very stuck on an idea and not be able to shift their thinking, which, they might be obsessed with something or they want something, they can't stop asking for it and they can't take no for an answer. And it can seem like they're not able to listen to reason. You can explain the reasons why you can't do X, Y, Z, and they just can't process it. They're not very good at problem solving or coming up with other strategies or solutions. And they're not very good at getting to a goal. They want things, but they can't do the steps to take to make it happen. So they're often dissatisfied, I think. And, if you add in all the things that can fuel the fire, they woke up irritable, they're just hot and tired and bothered after school or whatever it is. They're frustrated because you won't give them what they want. They can't stop thinking about the thing. Everyone is saying no all the time, and this whole situation is just too hard and they don't know why. They might have held it together all day at school, but when they come home, there might be quite an explosion. So I want to talk a bit about how children typically learn to regulate. What are the skills that we expect them to have, and how do they develop those? So from babies, from 0 to a year, we don't expect any regulation of them. We know babies need entirely adult support to regulate. Their ability to manage their attention, their emotions are at a very early stage. So they need adults to stay close, co-regulate, comfort them, take them to a quiet place, stop them doing something unsafe, anticipate that they're hungry, tired, thirsty, whatever, and have a routine that creates that predictability. But we know the adults have to do everything for a baby. That's pretty simple. For toddlers, they're starting to follow maybe simple instructions or cope with a short wait or manage little frustrations, but they're still very much relying on adults to regulate. When we look at what's happening in their brain, their ability to use language, their attention, their memory is starting to develop, but they've still got no real ability to stop an impulse or cope with frustration or calm themselves. So we know adults still need to do all of this for them. They need to redirect rather than reason and use short sentences. Offer 2 choices. Do you want the blue cup or the red cup? Do you want to walk or do you want me to carry you? Name feelings. I think you're a bit upset, and staying close and helping them calm down and waiting. And, anytime you go to the supermarket, you see someone having a tantrum on the floor and there'll be a parent kind of waiting for them to finish and so they can pick them up and take them out to the car. When we look at preschoolers, they're starting to remember simple rules, starting to recognize feelings. They might come up and go, he hurt my feelings, or she took that toy off me. And they can start to change their behavior with adult prompting. Well, why don't you go back and tell him that wasn't a very nice thing to do? Okay, I'll go and do that. If you tell them to, or teach them to use a calming strategy, they might be able to do it. They're starting to get some of this. They're starting to manage a little bit of their own ability to wait just a little bit. They've still got very limited impulse control and they can't be very flexible in their thinking, and their regulation skills are still at such an early stage. They can still be very easily overwhelmed. But they need adults to give them, little rules. We don't snatch, whatever the thing might be. Give little reminders. Remember, you need to do this before you do that. Help them get ready for changes and prepare for transition. You're going to have a new teacher today, or the childcare, going on excursion. Have you done all the things? So you're helping them, regulate all this stuff and doing those calming strategies. Why don't we just go and have a little walk, or whatever it might be, and helping them when their emotions get too big. In early primary school, we're starting to expect kids to have more ability to wait and take turns and pause before acting, which is all about executive function, really. Children this age can start using some of the strategies, but they might still need a lot of reminding or support from adults. So their brains are starting to get better at remembering what's expected, to pause a little bit, but they still need a lot of adult prompting, and the more tired and emotional they get, the more prompting and support they're going to need. So, it's pretty, similar to the younger group, but the adults probably just helping them prepare a bit more, reminding them, you've done this before, let's do it again, practicing the strategies and helping them problem solve when they're calm. In this middle childhood year, 8 to 12, we see increasing ability to recognise when kids are upset, to think before they're acting, to choose, well, I'm not going to do this, I'm going to do this instead, and to be able to think and talk about it later. So their ability to plan and self-monitor and impulse control and think about consequences is getting stronger, and children can usually take more responsibility for regulating themselves. Again, they still need support, they can't do it consistently, but they're beginning to learn. So our strategies become more about coaching and prompting rather than telling them what to do. What do you think you could do about that? I wonder what your options might be. You can help them anticipate problems. Well, if you don't take your jumper and you do need it later, what do you think might happen? You can help them with their organisational skills and remind them of what you'd planned before, and help them think about what didn't work last time, what could work this time. And then in adolescence, we expect young people to increasingly be able to recognise triggers and warning signs and to manage stronger emotions. They go off to their room and they process it and they come back out later. They think ahead a bit better. We expect them to understand consequences and to use these strategies. So typical brains are developing these abilities to manage complex competing demands, to manage impulses, and to choose strategies. So these skills we expect to develop. And so the way that we help adolescents regulate is to sort of give them more independence, step back, stay available, but, involve them much more in planning and working out what they want to do and problem solving. And then you sort of step in, you become more of a coach, to your young person. But when children have FASD, if we think back to the different skills, that the expectations of regulation rely on those brain functions. When children and young people don't have all of those skills, they're not going to be able to achieve that level of regulation, and the strategies we use are not going to be a good match to them. So it's really important for your child or young person to think about what skills are missing. What do you notice? What do the assessments tell you? If you look at, the ability to manage competing demands, control impulses, some of this will be covered in a child's cognitive assessment or neuropsychological assessment, or OT report where they'll describe that the young person is not able to manage competing demands or can't control their impulses. So it's really important, to have your own view of a child and really be able to drill down into what are the missing skills. Then we need to think about how do we support the child at their developmental age. Now, they're not going to have, we've talked about dysmaturity in the earlier workshop, that children have skills at different age levels. And it's a bit oversimplifying to say, oh, they're 10, but they're really 6. They might have, some abilities as a 3-year-old, some as an 8-year-old, and we don't want to label them too much, especially if they're listening. But if we just, mentally think about, well, I need to reduce, the expectations. And if we go back through, when I went through writing some of these strategies, I was thinking to myself, this is really what we do with 10-year-olds with FASD. Clear rules, simple reminders, limited choices. This is very much what I would often recommend for a late primary school person with FASD. And even some of these strategies for toddlers, and even some of the ones for babies, taking them to a quiet place, not expecting them to really do very much of the regulating at all. So you may have thought, going through these strategies, I'm still doing that. And that's because you probably recognize that your child or young person is still at that stage where they need that greater level of adult support. So one of the key things in FASD with emotional regulation, if we're talking about outbursts and big emotions, it's a lot about prevention. We want to try to reduce the demands on the child and on their brain before they lose that ability to regulate. Many things potentially can be prevented if we, and this goes back to the 8 magic keys. We want to make sure that we're matching the expectations to their developmental skills. Routines, reducing the cognitive sensory load. That means, not giving them too many words, too many things to think about, not too much going on around them. Notice early when they're overloaded and distract, divert, redirect them. Plan ahead for difficult situations. And, you might need to have lots of breaks, movement, food, calming activities, just to keep them regulated on a day. I think picking your battles is something that a lot of parents will know a lot about. And sometimes this can be a challenge, especially with family members who go, you're not going to let him get away with that, are you? I don't know how many of you ever heard that. But not every mistake needs a consequence, because sometimes our responses can increase the child's escalation. It's never, I think, helpful for a child with FASD to remind them that, well, this wouldn't have happened if you hadn't have blah, 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 or pointing out that there was a choice involved. Or even, thinking that a predictable failure, well, you haven't got your shoes, so you can't play basketball now. That's not going to teach them a lesson. It's just going to make them upset. And sometimes with FASD, we need to protect children from the consequences of their actions. If they want to go to basketball and you have said, have you got your shoes? And they said yes, and they've not got their shoes, and you get there and you go, well, they're going to have a meltdown, you're all going to have a bad night, and actually playing basketball is probably one of the best things in their week. We want to protect that activity for them. And, kids with FASD break things a lot of broken iPads, iPhones, TVs, but if you're using those devices, if those devices are sometimes what helps your child regulate, they also need them. So it's a bit like, if a younger child breaks something important around the house or loses the car keys, we don't say, well, now you can't go anywhere. Even though it's expensive, we just get new car keys. And that's sometimes the approach we need with kids with FASD, is to just protect them a little bit from the potential consequences of their actions that they couldn't have anticipated and they couldn't have really understood. Planning ahead, having those spare shoes in the car, double checking the bag, even if the child says they've packed everything, it's just the routine. We're going to check, checking with school about the due dates. Don't take the child's word for something important. Try not to let them start something they're not going to be able to finish in the time available. And this is where you might use sort of digital clocks or timers to show them the amount of time they've got left and prepare them for the fact that they're not going to be able to finish what they started, etc. Avoiding things like shopping after school, those sort of situations, and, getting robust covers for technology We also need to recognise when children's skills become less available. So they might be able to regulate at some times, but when they get overwhelmed or overloaded, the more dysregulated they get, the more trouble they're going to have, and the less able they are to access the skills that they have when they're calm. And when this happens, we need to reduce our expectations of the child to regulate or remember or to use those skills. And we need to increase the amount of support that parents or carers provide to help them regulate. We focus on the external regulation, not the child doing anything particularly. When escalation does start, really co-regulation is the best, most important sort of foundation, and this is probably something you've learned about in all sorts of training. It's a fundamental part of supporting any kids with trauma, and it's good for all children. We stay calm, we model being calm, we provide the external comfort, and if we think back to the baby, we fully help the baby co-regulate. We pat it, we walk it around, we feed it, we tuck it up, we do everything. As the child develops, we expect that they're going to be able to do more of that. But when a child has FASD and they're dysregulated, we end up doing a lot more of it again. And it can be very hard to stay calm in these situations. But as soon as we're not calm, we can't remember the strategies that we're going to use. And that's when we go back to habits, I don't know how many of you as parents have gone, well, I'm not going to be like my parents, but when you're really stressed, you end up saying something or doing something like, oh my God, that's what my mum used to say to me. And I swore I'd never say that, but it comes out because when you're stressed, you lose some cognitive skills and you kind of revert to habit, if you like. So there are a lot of different activities, and I won't go through all of these. I'm sure that you are probably familiar with a lot of these strategies as parents. If you look about, read about co-regulation and children online, we do need to simplify it a little bit more for children with FASD. The strategies need to be simpler. We need less words. We need to reduce the sensory input. And I'll probably, just keep it really, really simple. And if you're using calming strategies with them, like sensory items, practice them with the therapist beforehand and with the child. So that you might say, oh, I know when you get really upset, sometimes it's hard to calm down. I've thought of a couple of things that might help. Can we try them out? Tell me if you like doing this. Do you like being in the rocker? Do you like, getting in the shower? Does that make you feel better? Whatever it might be. It might just be that you observe this so that when the child is dysregulated, you can offer the thing that's most likely to be agreeable to them. You don't want to bring in something new. But if you as a carer can't stay regulated, that's going to be the first thing to work on, is calming yourself. And sometimes knowing that this is about their brain is what we have to say to ourselves. This is not intentional, even though it looks like it. This is not directed at me, even though it looks like it. This is a result of a brain injury, and they're not in control. When there are a range of strategies that you can kind of have in your toolkit, and I would suggest that when you're caring for a child that's dysregulated, you need quite a long list of things that you can go to quite quickly. This is a really good video by Nate Sheets, and I'm going to share this whole playlist with you, but I just want to play, if we've got time, just a minute of it. He goes through all the stages of an escalation. And this one is just about, I've put it to the bit where it's about what strategy you're going to use. So hopefully the sound is going to work on this.
So depending on the situation, you might need a strategy to get out of the escalation. One thing I recommend is putting all of the action on yourself. That way you're not telling somebody who has escalated what to do. Many of the people that we work with fetal alcohol and other conditions have what we call oppositional behaviors. And those oppositional behaviors really come out in this escalation time. So the more we can make somebody feel like they're in control of themselves and the situation, regardless of how oppositional they are, the better. So I suggest saying something like, hey, I need about 10 minutes just to calm down. This is as opposed to saying, hey, you need to go take space or you need to follow the plan. If we're at the point where that's not going to be happening, you can kind of put the strategy on you. So it's not them going to take space, it is you taking space. And of course, whether or not you can literally leave the area will be dependent on all of the safety considerations with the person you're supporting.
So I'll show you the link to that later, but I think these are really good videos, and it goes through different chapters about, the prevention, the co-regulation, and then creating safety, and then using different strategies, and then how to resolve it afterwards. And this is an 8-minute video, and he has many, many videos on this topic. So really encourage you to read up and hear what different practitioners say, what advice, because you'll be listening and you go, oh, that's something I could really do. That's a new idea. If you do get to the crisis, and Nate Sheets is really good about talking about this sort of point in time, it might be about just moving things away, creating space, letting one person take the lead, backing off, all the things you do when someone is really at their, explosive point. Reduce the stimulation. All the things that we can do are about making things quieter and simpler and reducing the demands on them, keeping your voice low, using, and if, things really escalate a lot, you probably need a safety plan with your providers that you can test out. I'm going to go outside. Oh, well, that didn't work because they followed me and they threw something at me. Okay, what's another option? Really work through that with your providers, because I'm not going to minimize how stressful this can be. And then when you get to the recovery bit, when they're starting to calm down, it's about helping them reset. And it might be helping them, get into doing something they enjoy or something they like, and then supporting the other family members who might be affected, who might be, upset or in their rooms or angry. We generally avoid talking about what went wrong with the young person if it's going to just set off another cycle, because often in these, cycle models, it's about, when you're calm, let's talk about what happened. For a child with young person with FASD, that's just going to remind them that they had a meltdown. They don't want to talk about it. They're going to escalate again if you keep reminding them of it, because they can't really process it. It wasn't in their control. And so I really recommend, don't talk about it, prevent it. Want to talk about it, great, if they're calm. And if they can do that, great. But the ability to reflect and remember, I mean, they probably often don't remember a lot of what they said and did, or they're so embarrassed by it, or they're defiant about it. It was no big deal. And that can be really upsetting for carers when a young person doesn't show remorse. So if you're expecting remorse, I would really not. It doesn't mean that they don't care about you. It just means they can't connect the dots in this scenario. And also, giving a young person something pleasurable when they've just had a meltdown can often be criticised by others as being a reward for bad behaviour, but it's not. It's a support for self-regulation. It's not a reward. It's not going to teach them bad behaviour, because this is not a learned behaviour. They're not doing it to get something. They're doing it because they can't regulate. So I have a playlist on this YouTube site that I've got. It's really mostly just other people's videos that I've put into playlists, but I'll share this link with you. It's got the Nate Sheets one. It's got Nathan Ori, who's really good. It's got another guy, Dan Dabowski, who I've talked about before. And, you can put these on, and just listen to the audio in the car, or, treat it like a podcast. But some of these bits of advice are really good. Nate Sheets has these very short videos. He also has a couple of 2-hour videos if you really want to get into it. But I think continuing to hear, what are other people's suggestions, what are other people's ideas, and then getting support. As carers, we need support. No FASD is very well set up to do this, to have a national helpline. They have a download on caring for yourself. There's a link to a blog here about how to recover after living with aggression. And Eileen, her name, Eileen Devine, has some really good webinars here about, how carers, can look after themselves and cope through some of these really challenging situations.